Hey everybody. Welcome to episode 3 of Utena Explained, the series where I go far too in-depth into one scene in an episode of Revolutionary Girl Utena. Today, we'll be looking at episode 4 of Revolutionary Girl Utena, the Sunlit Garden Prelude, and specifically the scene in the second half of the episode where Nanami is attacked by animals. If you've been following so far, you'll notice that I skipped episode 3, and that's because I didn't really have anything to say about it. So, without further ado, let's get to the scene. In this scene, Miki comes over to help Utena and Anthy study for their makeup math test. Nanami tags along to try to ruin Anthy's reputation with Miki and Utena because she's already decided from last episode that she and Anthy are mortal enemies. Nanami attempts 3 times to stash various animals around the room in order to frame Anthy as a weird girl who keeps pests. However, each time she does so, she finds that Anthy was already keeping animals in her room, much to Nanami's chagrin. Miki and Utena seem to take these animals in stride and totally accept that Anthy keeps snails, a mongoose, and a giant octopus balloon in her room without judgment, foiling Nanami's plans. I think anything that's repeated in Utena is a little important, so let's discuss. This scene is the first example of animals messing with Nanami, which will be something that happens a lot. This also establishes Anthy's connection with animals, since they are all pets of Anthy's. Since Anthy is a witch, and witches are said to be able to control animals, I think this is an example of Anthy using her various animal friends to covertly torture Nanami, who, for the record, totally deserves it in this case. While in the last episode, on the night of the ball, Nanami was portrayed as somewhat of a legitimate threat. Here, she is reduced to incompetence now that Anthy's figured out what she's up to. Nanami will be the designated comic relief character for most of the series, and this scene is the first example of this. There's a lot of irony in Nanami attempting to show Anthy isn't the sweet girl that Miki thinks she is. Nanami tries to show that Anthy isn't a normal girl by tricking Miki into believing she keeps weird animals everywhere. This is obviously hypocritical, because in order to set up this plan, Nanami would have had to collect these animals herself. Nanami doesn't seem to care about the fact that, traditionally speaking, a girl shouldn't be going around catching snails, snakes, and octopi for pranks. When Nanami has a goal, she doesn't give a damn about what anyone else thinks. Well, except for Toga. That's something that will remain true for her character to the very end, and actually is one of her better qualities. Of course, here her independent streak is being utilized for cruel intentions, but that won't always be the case. Secondly, at the start of the scene, Miki praises Anthy for keeping the room so tidy, and says that Utena must be lucky for having such a feminine roommate. Even though Miki just got done praising how feminine Anthy is, he is totally fine with her various animals, which is a source of humor in the scene. While Nanami would expect Miki to be disillusioned with Anthy, instead he rolls right along with it. Miki is blinded by his affection for Anthy and accepts everything about her without question. To be clear, I'm not saying that it's wrong for Anthy to keep weird animals, but it is illustrative of the fact that Miki had already decided he liked Anthy before actually getting to know her. This is most illustrated in Miki saying, "It's just like Miss Himemiya to do that," even though he just got done calling her feminine. We'll see how little both he and Utena understand Anthy later, when she ignores them to draw in her notebook.
だから、できた！これでどう？当たりです。なるほど。さすが超秀才。授業よりわかりやすいや。いや、そんな。真面目にやろうよ。追試は来週なんだからさ。はい。Utena様。
Miki is put out and Utena is disappointed in her because they think she doesn't care about studying with them, which is true. What they don't realize is that Anthy is purposefully ignoring Miki in order to keep him at arm's length, which will encourage him to duel Utena to get closer to her. I really enjoy this moment from Anthy because it's one of the only times we hear her laugh, and it's so out of place that it's obvious there's something up with her. Now I'm going to discuss the animals which appear in this scene. These especially are just my opinions, and could be completely unintended by the creators, so keep that in mind. All of the animals Nanami brings were primarily chosen because they were considered gross, but I still think there could be additional meaning to them. The first animal Nanami uses is a snail. Perhaps a snail's ability to defend itself by hiding in its shell is meant to remind us of Anthy in her coffin. Before moving on, I think it's interesting to note the names Anthy gives her snails: Catherine, Juliet, and Marcelina. I've linked to a Tumblr post by Rose Petal Revolution in the description, which attempts to analyze these names, but suffice it to say, I don't think that they were chosen randomly. Juliet is probably a reference to Romeo and Juliet, while Marcelina could be a reference to Princess Marcelina Czartoryska, who was a student and friend of the famous pianist Chopin. If you're interested, then go read the post, because anything more I could say about this was said there. The next animal is a garter snake, which is eaten by Anthy's mongoose, Mr. Mongoose. The good news for Anthy and Utena is that garter snakes are not dangerous to anything much larger than a mouse. A possible meaning behind the use of a snake here is related to the insult of calling someone a snake. At least in Western culture, calling someone a snake insinuates they're an untrustworthy liar or a backstabber, which could apply equally to Nanami or Anthy. I don't know enough about Japanese culture to say whether this connotation carries over into their language, so take that with a grain of salt. In some Native American traditions, garter snakes symbolize jealousy or dishonesty, and one of my pet theories is that yellow symbolizes jealousy in Utena. I think this meaning is a stretch, but I will mention anything that supports my ideas about the color yellow. As far as the mongoose, they're a courageous little animal that eats snakes, and I couldn't find anything relevant about its potential meaning. They are very cute though. Lastly, we have an octopus. Octopi can camouflage themselves, so perhaps this is a parallel to Anthy and Nanami, and how they are disguising their true intentions. Another minor bit of characterization here is how when Anthy says she felt bad for the balloon and brought it home, Utena says, "Didn't you say you were sick of it and it should be thrown away?" Another example of Anthy lying to put on an image. A little later, we'll see the octopus standing behind Miki, its tentacles coiling towards him. Maybe, and just maybe, this is meant to show Anthy beginning to wrap her own tentacles around Miki. After the octopus, there's this really weird transition with a zap sound effect. I don't have anything to say about it, except I find it really weird. The last act of animal on Nanami cruelty from Anthy is when Choo-Choo eats the food Nanami brought for everyone. Right before Nanami totally loses it, Anthy stands up, putting her in a dominant position over Nanami in the frame, and says she'll make some food for them. Cut to a bowl of shaved ice, Anthy's specialty, quote-unquote. Anthy saying it's really good when you mix the red and the yellow always struck me as funny for how completely bland of a statement it is. Miki predictably loves the shaved ice and asks Anthy for the recipe. Of course, shaved ice doesn't really have a recipe, so Miki's trying a bit too hard here. Shaved ice will come up several times throughout the series as a way to emphasize that Anthy can't cook. There's more you could read into that fact, but I don't want to get into it here. At this point, Nanami blows her cover and gives a somewhat justified rant. As she does this, we see the octopus she brought strangling Choo-Choo, showing that Nanami's managed to actually catch on that Anthy's up to something. That's actually a legitimate question, and shows Nanami is more perceptive than we might at first think. Her brashness prevents her from communicating this well, though, which is something that we'll see again when she tries to warn Utena about Anthy at the end of the series. Anthy runs away from the confrontation and begins to play Miki's piece, The Sunlit Garden, which is a deliberate move to manipulate Miki into obsessing over her. It also totally distracts Utena and Miki from Nanami's line of questioning. Miki hears his sister's tone in the piece, though we later learn that Kazue was actually not very good at the piano. This is yet another instance where Miki sees what he wants to see, or hears what he wants to hear, in Anthy, when it isn't actually there. To wrap up, why is this animal joke done 3 times in a row? From the first setup to the weird zap takes about 5 minutes, which is roughly a quarter of the episode's runtime, excluding the opening and ending. I think there are 3 main reasons. Firstly, it was cheap. A lot of animation is reused each time the joke is done. Second, it establishes Nanami and Anthy's rivalry by beating it into the viewer's skull with repetition. To quote from the director's commentary, "I made such a radical departure in the second half of this episode that you might well ask yourself, is this the same show? I did it to solidify the positions of Nanami's and Anthy's characters." So, there you go, word of God. Third, in comedy, there is a concept you may have heard of called the Rule of 3. Generally speaking, a comedic bit is funnier if it occurs in 3 parts. There are a lot of reasons this is the case, and a lot of different ways this guideline can be used. Often the first 2 instances of a joke set up expectations for the third, which are then subverted. Hot take alert! I don't think this scene is really funny enough to warrant 5 minutes, and I don't think that this is a very good use of the Rule of 3. Because the jokes are back to back with each other, and each iteration is essentially identical to the last, by the end of it, I'm just ready for it to be over with. In fact, this scene is one of my least favorite parts of Utena, and I dread it every time I rewatch the series. It takes the pacing from slow to snail, especially when it comes right after episode 3 on the night of the ball, which is also one of my least favorite episodes. That being said, after writing all this, I think I've gained some level of appreciation for it, even if I still can't call this scene one of my favorites. Even the parts of Utena which I'm not crazy about had thought put into them, and while not everything is a complete success, at least everything serves some purpose. One of the things I enjoy most about Utena is that while it can be very abstract and symbolic, it nearly always tries to entertain the viewers at the same time. While I don't think that they succeeded in making this scene funny, there are plenty of comedic moments in Utena which I enjoy wholeheartedly. I'm curious to hear if you feel the same way about the scene, or if you feel the opposite and find it hilarious. Either way, thanks for watching. I'm currently working on a script about Mawaru Penguin Drum, that's going to be hard to pronounce when the time comes, and Evangelion. So look forward to those coming in the near future. And if you haven't seen those shows, then what are you doing? Go watch those. Don't watch this. Go watch those shows. They're really good.